Bimma, what's going on, dog?
I'm doing all right. How you feeling?
Dude, I can't complain. Life is good, man. We out here. You know what I'm saying? West Coast living.
Yeah, man. It's on the West Coast. We living all right. The sun is coming out, so definitely feeling a little better. Definitely people are in better moods. I'm in a better mood.
Oh my God, dude. Yeah, I really feel like when I walk outside, I just feel the optimism. Like the weather's getting warmer, the vaccines are rolling out. I just feel it off of people.
Right, totally. You could feel the shift, and just dealing with COVID and also dealing with a lot of the things that were shifting, and then that weather. Just like we were all in kind of these little moods, and so now it's starting to open up.
So, Bimma, man, first I want to say you've lived a life that every kid, whether they knew it or not, dreamed of living. I remember being, I never saw myself, I never saw myself ever, as a kid, I've always loved sneakers. Like to this day, I have probably 40 sneakers.
Yeah.
Um, and I grew up in this world where I love sneakers, but didn't even see it as a job. Didn't even see that like people design these or there's an industry behind it. I just liked them. I remember, and they were kids growing up.
Right.
I remember, because I was one of them, that the kids who would actually be drawing sneakers for fun. Like you would sit in class and just draw sneakers.
Oh, I have a ton of stories about that. Like that was that's just all I would just do these doodles, right? And just, make up like my favorite basketball sneakers. I can't recall the shapes that I was drawing, but I could totally relate to doing that, especially in like elementary school.
T- Tell me, what was the process for you when you realized that that love and that natural passion that we all had as kids for sneakers could be a job?
Oh, Corey, honestly, it took quite a long time because to your point, you didn't realize that it was. And I think, to give a little bit more context to that, when I think back, like the only thing I knew about sneakers was retail. Just like, so many of my other friends that, were black in the neighborhoods we grew up in, we just knew where to buy them. We didn't know that people made them. We didn't know how they made them. We didn't know how these commercials were made, or any of these things. And so it wasn't until really that I started to understand more about that until like college, honestly, like later college, like even getting out of college, because I graduated and I still didn't still didn't know kind of what the job opportunities were. And it wasn't until when I was about 24 that I met someone that worked at this company called Saucony out in Boston. And he just broke down. His name's Juris Cooper, and he broke down so much information to me about like, there's this marketing department, and I do this, and there's people that do that. And so I honestly didn't learn until super late.
And I always say for a lot of us, for me, it was rap. I wanted to be a rapper, and I
Mm-hmm.
still rap. I don't think it ever leaves you.
Yeah.
Um, but I realized once I got to a certain point in my career, it didn't make me as happy as I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like I enjoyed the journey of it, of getting there, more than I enjoyed getting there.
Huh.
Once you got to the mountaintop of, working at Nike or Adidas or Saucony, what were the things that, I don't know, maybe you were prepared for when you got there?
Well, before I get into that, I also wanted to be a rapper.
Sneakers and rappers.
Sneakers and rappers. I mean, growing up down south, there was no limit in cash money, so it's kind of hard not to get caught up in that culture. But when I made it to these different sportswear and sneaker companies, I think the thing that I wasn't prepared for was the fact that at Saucony, I would be the only one. And what I mean by being the only one is that I was the only black man in that office. And I was coming out of Louisiana, coming out of New Orleans area. And when I got there, I was like, oh my goodness, like where where's the diversity?
Right, right, right.
it, it was something I never thought about. Like I didn't think about that when I took the role. I was just like, great, like this is exciting. I can get to go work it like with sneakers and athletes and culture icons. Like this is gonna be super dope. I had no idea that that's what I was going to be walking into. And what I tell people is, you go through like a scenario of things. You just you walk in, you kind of just feel automatically like this fish out of water, and it's not necessarily because anyone's treating you wrong at the moment, but you just feel so vulnerable, and that's how I felt. And there were two things that would happen. I would either have this thought where maybe I made the wrong decision and I should move back home, or I'm gonna overcompensate and I'm just gonna work harder. I'm gonna work longer, because I can't show any sort of mediocrity. I have to be better than everybody, because I'm the only one.
And what's so interesting about that too, Bima, is that it's almost like growing up, sneakers, what makes sneakers cool
Mm,
are us,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Right. And so it's so fascinating that we make sneakers cool.
mhm,
I always say things can be successful,
yeah,
right? But
yeah,
things aren't cool
yeah.
unless it's stamped by us, you know? But it's so interesting that inside of the walls of the products that we buy, we weren't inside of them.
Yeah, and that's what's so bizarre to me, that for so long, a lot of these companies didn't understand that, and they, we haven't been in those halls. We're still talking about those conversations today, and these companies wonder why their lines aren't growing or they aren't making more profits. And it's like, you don't have that. You don't have the person that's buying your product working at the company.
Mm. Right.
Like that's a challenge. You're missing a whole point of view about how to connect more to that community. What is that community actually like? What colors they like? What materials, right? Like, who are the people that influence them? It's just so much is missing when we aren't there.
And so I want you to treat me like an executive.
Mm,
Um, Treat me like an executive. And I'm going to bring you into the boardroom
mhm.
and I want you to tell me, hey, what could I do to help get more people like us, or not just us, but other
Mhm.
people of other into the company, into the space, involved in the industry?
One of the first things I would say that's not going to be a popular opinion is that, well, likely if you're sitting at that table, you're likely a white man. And so what I would say is, maybe it's time for you to find another table and make some space for some other folks to come to that table, because as long as you're there, not much is going to change, because there's not going to be much space for the rest of us to get there. After that, after there's space made for us to come to the table, I think you need to have systems in place where those diverse voices, and you can't just bring in one. You need to bring in, almost, 50%, 40%, right? So that when decisions are being made, there's enough diversity in the room, no matter ethnicity, gender identity, what have you. You need to make sure that that's in the room, so that when you're talking through proposals and you're talking through opportunities and growth, you have different people that can have a point of view. Because what happens is, a lot of times, you might bring in one person, you might bring in one gender, one race, and they'll have an opinion on something, and their voice might get overshadowed because the rest of the room is still the same. And that room is still comfortable with the ideas and the thoughts that everyone else in that room has. And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't change anything. So you have to really consider, like, hey, we are going to make space for, 40% more folks, from a diverse background to come in here. We want to hear their voices. We set up a fair system so that can happen. And then you start to see real change. And then the third piece would be, if you're doing that and your house is actually in order. And I think that's the key, right? Like, is your house in order? If your house is in an order, I think you need to figure out how you want to start working with, um, bringing in new talent, or how you collaborate with creatives outside of the brand, the walls of the brand, right? And to me, that more so comes down to adopting new strategies for doing that. And, whether that's through social media or agencies or podcasts, like really starting to figure out different ways to do that, because otherwise you just might fall susceptible to the same ways that people have always started to seek talent, and which is likely proximity.
Bimma, before we get to your podcast, I'm gonna switch the roles now. So now
Okay.
you talk to me as an executive. Now talk to me as your brother, as your friend,
Mhm.
as someone who's a fan of the fashion industry and a fan of sneakers.
Mhm.
What can I do, our listeners do, collectively to help get more people like us or other into those spaces and create opportunities?
The number one thing that I would encourage folks, and I encourage a lot of people that reach out to me, that in any industry, it doesn't matter. This doesn't matter the industry. And it would be, you need to network and get to know people. And it doesn't mean you need to be an ultra power networker. I'm not telling you, if you're a shy person, I'm not telling you that you need to be going out of your way to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. But above and beyond, the thing that has helped me the most in my career is genuinely connecting with someone, telling them what I'm passionate about, sharing what my skill set is, what I've been able to accomplish, showing a portfolio of work. And when I say portfolio, at the time, my portfolio that got me to Saucony was Instagram. So you could get creative with what that portfolio is, and have some sort of goal of what you think you might want your career to be. Like, you don't have to be exact. Some of us are at a different place in our careers where we have a bit more of a sharp vision. Some of us are still forming that and it's a bit wide open. That's okay too. But I would say you need to be cultivating relationships even before you necessarily have an ask or no, and be genuine about it. It's not just because you want something out of someone, it's because you want to get to know them, and perhaps they can help enrich your life, but then you can also perhaps enrich their life. And I think that's what folks have to understand when you're connecting or networking and building relationships. It's always a two-way street, right? It's not just take. It's also how can I give information back to someone else.
Man, and I was going to get right to your podcast, but you touched on something that really resonated with me in that response, because I took a very informal route. Now I feel like with with the way the technology is moving now, and I don't feel like college is as important. It's important, but not as important as it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because of the internet, and we
Mm,
can put ourselves out on the internet. And you mentioned something about Instagram, and so I want to also encourage people who may not have a formal or technical or traditional educational background. And you
mm.
talked about your Instagram being your portfolio. Are there any other DIY ways that you can showcase your talent, that doesn't come from a traditional background?
Oh my goodness, totally, right? Like I remember I was mentoring um, I was mentoring this kid that wanted to work at Nike, and they wanted to be a product line manager in footwear. And that's like a super coveted role because you're part of like bringing sneakers to life. Like, it is a dream role. It's like you're working with designers, you're working with these people called developers who work back with the factories that actually turn these sketches and molds into actual sneakers. And they're like, oh, I can't, I got retail experience, but you know, I, there's not really opportunities at Nike just yet. Like, what do you think I could do? And I was like, why don't you create like a mock brand? Like, why don't you create a mock release plan? Like, it doesn't have to be a real thing to show that you have an understanding and that you're trying to learn. I spoke with someone this season, a young woman named Jade Purple Brown, who's out of New York, and Jade had aspired to be a creative director, an art director, and she didn't have any experience. And so she would make fake packaging. She would make fake brand campaigns. She would, make these things not to fake anyone out, but to say, hey, I took this liberty on my own to show what's possible with my skill set. And I would always encourage, like, don't wait. I think that's the other thing, is don't wait for someone, for that opportunity to come along. Be ready. Be ready. Like, figure out like how you can show off your talent. For musicians, they post snippets of songs on social media. For designers, they post sketches of their sneakers. For podcasters, we post snippets of our conversations, and that's a way of showing the quality of our work, or showing examples of our work. I would challenge anyone, any creative, any professional, anyone that's trying to get an opportunity and build connections. It's like, well, first you got to give someone something worth having a conversation about.
Mm. Bimma, we're gonna take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to your podcast, Claima Stories. And Bimma, we're back. I'm taking advantage of this break and have a little water.
Let me check some as well.
So Bimma, tell me, how did you first fall in love with the medium of podcasting?
Goodness. I fell in love with podcasting probably around 2017, 2018. And I would go out for my morning run, and I found a lot of times I just automatically turn on music, and I love music, don't get me wrong, and I still listen to music on my runs today. But I was also starting to get into audiobooks at that time as well. And I started to listen to audiobooks. And then a couple friends would send me podcasts from time to time. And naturally, I just started to get obsessed with some of these different podcasts, because I just loved hearing some of these stories through audio. And those were the type of podcasts that I really started to resonate with me, are the ones where you hear stories from different walks of life and different people. And so it became this new obsession of mine, just hearing like stories of people, whether they were creating businesses or stories about people that were working in streetwear, and how they were doing some of these different things. But I just thought it was such a dope platform. And it was a kind of natural segue for someone who like just listening to music on apps like Tidal.
Now, for folks who yes, who are going to listen to Claima Stories, yes, they can go through the show notes and read what it's all about, but in your own words, can you give me the elevator pitch of what the show's all about?
Yeah, totally. So Claima Stories, Claima is short for Claim a Seat at the Table. And we tell stories about BIPOC creatives, right? We tell the stories about their career journey, where they started, how they really started to get into their careers. Where did they stumble? Where did they get help? How were they able to get some of those first projects that really kicked off their careers? For example, Jeff Staple of Pigeon and Staple Pigeon, and his story about creating the Dunk too. But before that, like, he had to go to Japan, and like he didn't know Japanese, and really like running through the city to try to figure out who could connect them to ultimately today Jeff has his own podcast. And we love to tell that story, because a lot of times people like myself and you, we might see those things happening, but we don't understand how they got there, right? And so for me, when I was working in the sneaker industry, it was like, well, how do you get to some of these roles? How do you get to become a designer? How do you get to be a collaborator? But now working with someone like Jeff is like, how do you become a successful entrepreneur and personality? And so why we do that is because we want to help creatives claim their own dream career, whatever that career may be. We want those stories to help them do that.
And always say, Bimma, I learned so much about myself from interviewing other people. What have you learned about yourself from getting the stories of creatives that you admire?
I would say what I've learned is that for so long I thought I was doing something wrong, and that wasn't necessarily the case. Like when we interviewed Melody Asani, she's a designer out of LA, and she spoke about kind of similar things that I would say is like I just didn't know these careers existed, right? Like Melody had no idea about design until after she decided she wasn't going to go, or product product design until after she decided she wasn't going to go to law school. And it was because we'd never been exposed to these things. A lot of times, folks from BIPOC communities, these Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, we only know about law and like medicine and some of these things that our parents really want us to do because they really want us to have a better life. And we just don't know all the things that we can accomplish with our creativity. And so today, with so many of these incredible creatives and these new digital tools that are accessible, we can create careers out of so many different things. And that's truly what I've learned. And I'm even still evolving, right? Like I stepped away from my corporate profession last August, and so now I'm in a new space where I'm also learning from some of the folks that I interview about how they were able to grow their businesses and how they're able to shape their lives around what they're passionate about.
Hmm. And before we get to your podcast, Just Fix Bimma, is there anything you want listeners to walk away with after listening to an episode of Claima Stories?
Totally. I think the most important thing that folks should understand is that when you're going to come listen to Claima Stories, you're going to leave with the most inspiring stories about the careers of Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, creatives, and the careers they've been able to claim. You're going to leave that and you're going to be thinking, ooh, I wonder if it's time for me to pursue the thing that I've been really interested in, and who can I speak with, or maybe I can go start my portfolio now, or maybe I can go ask this person for support and help. It's gonna fire you up so much because these stories make you understand that you can do this too. Like you can truly go accomplish and really go pursue what you're truly passionate about. And so if you're someone who is a creative and you're looking for that inspiration and you're looking for that community, that's why you want to come listen to Claima Stories.
And Bimma, we've come to a part of the show called our Podcasters Picks. Now, this is when I ask the guests of today's show to provide me with their top 3 favorite podcasts that they enjoy that we should be listening to. So, Bimma, take it away.
Yeah, so I would say the first one would be At Your Service Imprint by Noor, which is a great podcast, and they talk about the experience of story, and it's great. They do great things on live interviews, on Instagram and all of that. So definitely love that. Huge fan of How I Built This with Guy Raz. I love hearing those entrepreneur stories and how folks were able to turn cookies into these giant brands. My wife has a plant-based ice cream company called Kate's Ice Cream here in Portland. So we both kind of love those stories. And then the other one that I'm a huge fan of is Jeff Staple, and it's The Business of Hype. Just being a kid that grew up loving streetwear and hearing some of these stories behind some of these creatives, it's ultra inspiring. So super love that. And then honorable mention, but not honorable mention, just me trying to sneak a fourth in, is Song Exploder. They have that new series on Netflix, but it's super, super good.
And Bimma, before we get out of here, why do you podcast?
I love this. I love being able to connect with people like you. I would always say my best skill when I was coming up in corporate was that I was great at communicating with people, and I loved it. I just love spending that time hearing folks' stories, and just getting to know someone genuinely. I think I got some of that from my dad growing up in the South. Like this guy would have a conversation with someone in the supermarket for like 40 minutes. You know what I'm saying? I'm just like, hey, I'm just trying to go I just want to go sit in the car.
He was a podcaster before podcasting.
Podcaster before podcasting. I'm so serious. Like if you meet this guy, it's just literally I'm just like, this is crazy. So that's where I got it from, but that's why I love it. I love connecting with new people like yourself.
Bimma, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I'm a big fan of Claima Stories. I'm a big fan of you and what you do. and what you represent and what you represent to the space. Congratulations on being #1 on Apple in the careers category. My friend, that's really, really big. We need more people like us up in the charts.
We need more of us up in the charts. I hope Apple is listening and paying attention. There's a lot of great, BIPOC creatives creating podcast content out. We need to be elevated. We need to be having the same visibility as our counterparts.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bimma, for being a guest on OPP. Much love, brother.
Appreciate you.